Hey, welcome back, Yvonne Wakefield's YouTube channel. Just want to remind you all that these books that I read from have all been professionally narrated by Kay Webster, and they're on audio book. So if you want like a really streamlined telling of these books, read this. I go through my books. We're reading the third book right now, and I stop and I tell little tales. And it's all based on this log cabin I built when I was 18, which is still there up in the Oregon mountains. And I was there this weekend. In fact, I got back last night. I hadn't been there since November, so there's a process where you have to open up a cabin. Luckily, there weren't any rodents or dead mice, but there's things you have to do. And I teach physical exercise classes, and I go to the gym 5 days a week, and I'm very active. But I dug out the outhouse Saturday with post hole diggers. And then later that day and yesterday morning, I took a mattox and a shovel and I opened up this huge area of the road that was sunk in mud. I am so sore today that when I went to feed the dogs their breakfast, I could not bend down to give them their dishes. So you use a lot of different muscles up there. And the other thing was, it was 28 degrees. I had to keep stoking the fire. Luckily, I have a lot of firewood. All right, last week we read from 2 chapters, the bear trap. There was a canister bear trap in the Judge's Meadow. I hung out with him and another guy. We talked about it. And then 4, F-O-R-E, kind of talked about my early days of golfing that I recalled as I was pulling my little hand cart down the mountain and then in the Judges teeing up apples and driving them hard. Tonight, we're going to go to Tisk Tas, which is kind of I just opened up the cabin yesterday. There's also a process of you have to close it down. And the reason this cabin is still there after 50 years is because of regular and constant maintenance. So I'm in my 20s at this point, and I have a job in Mendocino, California, but I was allowed to go have 3 months to go be at the cabin, so I would live there rent-free. So this is one of those times I'm getting ready to go back to my office life in Northern California. When all the apples have ripened, fallen, been eaten by bears, been hit, chipped, or driven, the calendar enumerates it is past time to return to the land of fault lines and registration lines. I finagled a way to extend a 3-month summer on the mountain and must return to sea level this early October. There I will wear more figure-hugging linens, vestments fashioned for working behind closed doors, and weary work shirts will doze folded inside drawers. One southerly state away, where a job and classes await, the sun at this time is high on the horizon. The only shadows cast from cypress trees, sandstone bluffs, and ocean-parting whale or freighter. At the cabin, this time late summer light sinks early behind piney screens of trees, prompting the layering of woolens as nights are bone-chilling. Within a week, I will become entangled with telephones and typewriter lines, deadlines and timelines, and there is much to do before departing the mountain. 3 main chores categorize how I will divide my remaining days in the forest. Carpenter ants and packrats will reduce the cabin to uric-reeking sawdust if I don't resort to poison. If the bathing pool is going to be viable next spring, it needs reinforcing to hold up winter's runoff. Damming it requires thinking like a beaver and a determined little Dutch boy. Refilling the woodshed involves muscling a chainsaw, splitting maul and axe, then separating lengths of tamarack, white, red, and Doug fir into balanced stacks. One chore not on my list was to finish reading books by authors with the last name starting at A all the way to Z. It is something I challenge myself to do read an entire alphabet of authors every summer. With 1 week to go, I'd made it as far as Lessing. In a few cases, Cather, for example, I'd read My Antonio, Antonia, Old Pioneers, and Death Comes for the Archbishop. A 2-book detour. Likewise, Didion tripped up my literary timeline because Joan extended the D-limit, originally devoted to Darwin. One of her essays in Slouching Towards Bethlehem, which I read several times, references a 16-year-old middle-class chick who comes to see what it's all about in the Height. A teenage street dealer shoots her full of speed, hand feeds her amphetamines, then raffles off her drugged-up body for the biggest gangbang since the night before. I was too young and parented to be part of the 60s disenfranchised youth, Didion chronicled. Sunday Mass at the cathedral and later brunch at Mark Hopkins were my early Bay Area experiences when a walkaway shrimp cocktail cost $0.25 at the briny, wood-planked Fisherman's Wharf docks. Man, I went back there about 5 years ago to Fisherman's Wharf. I couldn't believe it. It was like, Target Wharf. But I did grow into the 16-year-old middle-class chick temporarily unemployed by the politics of being on the loose and was disenfranchised in similar ways. Through blind fortitude, I ended up saved within evergreen margins. But how, I wondered, do you go on, and where do you go after you've gone through what that 16-year-old chick experienced in the Height? Maybe because you're so broken, you take any hand extending more than dope. Maybe you follow people wearing clothes limited to the colors of rising or setting sun, devotees to a white-haired Rolls-Royce worshiping man. Or you follow your intuition, like I did, to see what was about in Oregon's mountains. Instead of getting picked up by a 17-year-old street dealer, a batch of open-hearted people in a valley named John Day held out their wholesome hands. Building a log cabin on the mountain sheltered me from the city streets and kept me as clean and clear as my bathing creek. Maintaining this standard is perhaps why the first task to check off on the list was to hustle like a little Dutch girl. The summer before, I buzzed out a fallen log across a portion of the creek where cutthroat trout gather in the ripples, and I could sit in water up to my neck. Twigs and pokey things stuck out from the natural dam and sometimes put a scare into me when I mistook a waving stick for a water snake. Breaking apart that log jam blocking the passage would allow me to bathe without feared company of a serpent, imagined or not. A couple of chainsaw cuts dislodged the damming log, and decades of needle mortar washed away. But instead of beautifying my bathing pool, I destroyed a century of sedimentary succession, and friendly fish flooded downstream. "Should let me get my cat up there," was Don Paulson's reply. He is the roly-poly, tobacco-chewing jack of all trades who lives in the ranch house I pass on my going-to-town drives. I bumped into him at True Value and told him I was rebuilding a pool after he inquired, "Levon," remember everybody called me back then, Levon. "Levon, what you doing up there?" I didn't mention pest extermination, although the intent was boldly advertised in my handful of purchases. "Cat will clean you out a pond in an hour. Won't be nowhere for the fish to go. Throw in some cornmeal, fatten them up, drop in a line, and heat up the skillet." Don was staring through me at a picture of himself sitting down to a meal of buttered brown fillets, one I'd not invited him to partake of. "No siree, Bob," I reply, although quite cognizant his name is Don. This addressing change was enough to make him take off his cowboy hat, scratch his head, and reconsider bulldozing out a pond in my creek, or angling uninvited for a fresh catch. Don was clear on one thing. In the 1 hour it would take me to carry and dump 10 boulders in the creek, he could doze out a deep soaking pool. I'd witnessed his handiwork before, and I did not want to see it repeated on my water source. A couple of draws over, he'd been hired to create a trout pond. Bucket load by bucket load, he scooped out a section of a creek bed, dumping the tailings to pool a flow. The rancher stocked the new pond with non-native trout, which went belly up before he even took time to drop in a hook. Because it lacked sufficient spillway, the water stagnated, and fish suffocated in an aquatic mire, heating hot as soup under a serving of summer sun. It reeks so bad, even a cat wouldn't get within a whisker's length of its foul embankment. No siree, Don. I change his name back again. Don't talk to me about getting any cat near my creek unless it purrs. He kind of smiled at that and didn't push the point, paid for his purchases before mine were rung up, and we parted with bulging paper bags. Early afternoon is the best time for working on the dam because the pool is in full sun, still not enough to warm the glacial runoff where I wade and juggle damming rocks. To prevent frostbite and toes from breaking by rolling boulders, I wear thick green rubber boots. Cinched tight below the kneecaps, they still fill with water, but allow just enough insulation to keep my feet from freezing white. Over the summer, I humped and huffed all the nearby boulders used in dam fortification. Today, any stone I'm able to carry is imported from the farthest corners. The sloshing water inside my waders warm as I waddle under the heft of igneous and glacial deposits. One by one, I set them in place, wedging stabilizing pebbles between rock-faced gaps. Over the seasoned forest, duff will create a firming mortar. By the time more water stays than drains through the stony barrier, the sun is low, and my toes are puckered prunes. Hours later, I kneel beside the creek to scoop water to heat for washing. As the bucket rims breaks the surface, a finny dash reflects that I will again share my bathing pool with speckled chum. Damn good job, I say out loud to impress that cutthroat in my silent spring. Far less effort is involved in building a dam than there is in plotting against carving bugs and tinkling rodents. Not one volume in my summer's reading included a sentence, even a word, on vermin eradication. Furthering this literature review means researching the labeled bottles, boxes, and jugs in True Values aisles lined with containers of potions with active ingredients like cypermethrin and improthrin and other chemicals with long names and longer life in the environment. Cather wasn't the sole C on that summer's reading list. One passage in Rachel Carson's Silent Spring stuck with me. The paperback's author wrote of seeing a dead squirrel after it had ingested toxic bait. Quote, the head and neck were outstretched and the mouth often contained dirt, suggesting that the dying animal had been biting at the ground. By acquiescing in an act that causes such suffering to a living creature, who among us is not diminished as human beings? None of the products on True Values shelf listed DDT, the chemical Carson referred to as the caveman's club. But instinctively, I knew those long words on labels meant that what was inside those containers must be bad for the future of the birds and bees and yet unseen. As I walked out of True Value with a paper sack, I felt Rachel shaming me. Even though I may question the purpose of a species on the planet, I generally have a let it be philosophy, even the mosquito needling into my arm before I decide otherwise and flat out slap it. I rescue angleworms and night crawlers before they can dehydrate on the sidewalk. Daddy longlegs and other venomous spiders trapped inside slick-walled sinks or bathtubs are set free. If red ants are discovered swarming under a log belly, I roll it back over instead of chainsawing their nest for grade D firewood. Inside the cabin, I draw the line with carpenter ants, poisonous black widows, brown recluses, anaphylactic shocking yellow jackets, and hunter virus packing rodents. I do not like using poison, and I do it as a last resort to do with the packrats that would overtake the cabin in an unguarded moment. The smell of their urine takes your breath away, and smelling their poop could kill you. I tried to live trapping them for a bit, capturing one pom-pom-tailed rodent and naming it Theodore. So these packrats I'm talking about, they actually do have a pom-pom on their little tail. That's why you know that they're a pack rat as opposed to like a different rat. Capturing one pom-pom-tailed rat and naming it Theodore before triggering the metal wild door and freeing him beside a tributary of the John Day River. Because I'm away for weeks at a time and unable to release the cage, I rely on barbait. Only once have I wired those green poison cubes outside the cabin walls, hooked to the dormer eave where packrats were using the metal roofing like a slip and slide. I removed the hardly nibbled bar the next morning, and only once did I discover a victim of my handiwork. Underneath the porch, a tiny gray mummified mouse stretched out as if lounging on the Caribbean beach, sunning its white tummy, and I did not observe dirt in its belly. When I moved to the cabin, I learned to heat and cook with a custom-made 1975 Frontier stove, really more like a fireplace with a two-tiered top and heating trivets welded to the sides. Later, I installed a smaller cook stove. Both require wood, lots of it, cut in specific lengths and diameters to accommodate separate fireboxes. To keep my heat source protected from the elements which limited pre-planning, I built a woodshed by felling, bucking, draw knifing, and sinking 4 12-foot tall logs in cement-filled holes dug 3 feet down. This allowed for a slope roof height of 9 feet to cover an enclosure 5 by 5 feet deep over a cord of split logs kindling in tinder. Bracing the posts with 2x4 scrap was a breeze, but my lone carpentry skills were not elevated enough to hoist up rafters and roofing boards. For $10 an hour, I hired a guy to help me. He would lay a shed roof while I went downtown to buy tar paper. By the time he returned, he'd done what I'd asked, but angled it so the accumulated snow would slide off the roof and block the roadway. Board by board, we reassembled the pitch and shimmied in 2-foot log chunks so it sloped away from the road as originally intended. By the time I have to return to fault and registration line, bait is set, the bathing pool is dammed, and the wonky woodshed is stacked with wood as high as my head. All right, that's about closing it down. I didn't mention to you yesterday, one of the things, I'm really super fire conscious. I noticed on the doors, the steel doors to the fire box I was talking about, there was like built up creosote. Creosote is the accumulation of smoke and tar. And so yesterday morning, I'm taking a butter knife to scrape it all off on some newspaper, and a chunk flies into my eye, and I kept blinking to see if I could blink it out, and it could not blink it out. So I go to the mirror, and there's like a huge chunk of tar stuck in my eye. I managed to get it out. I put glasses on, and actually did use some gloves because it is kind of sharp. It's just what you do to survive up there and to maintain the place. So I hope you enjoyed tonight. Remember to subscribe. It's free. Pop over to the YouTube channel or the podcast. And next week we'll do 2 shorter chapters putting together. And remember, our tour is going to put a picture. I've never taken a selfie in my entire life. I've been in selfies other people have taken. But yesterday I took a selfie of me in the mud. Our tour is going to put it up. And one of the things I also do is I never carry my phone with me when I work because you never know what's going to happen. But since I was in the mud, I put it in my pocket after I took the picture because I didn't want to walk back to the truck. And I'm like mad-oxing out the mud, and I kind of twist, and I almost fell over sideways down a mountain in the mud with the phone. So that was a good lesson to me. Don't take your phone when you work in mud puddles. Anyway, have a good evening. Remember, stay hydrated, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.